Okay, welcome back. Chapter 1. Going to spend most of our time in the last part of that, which is verses 5 through 11, but I wasn't able to finish verse 4 from last time. So I want to spend a little time in verse 4, ask a few summary questions for you guys to think about, and then we'll dive into the rest of it this evening, and we'll finish up chapter 1 tonight. That's our plan. Let's go ahead and start off with a prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, we want to thank you so much for this time we have to gather together once again and open your book. Help us, Father, to study with open minds and to be excited to share this information with others around us. Help us to always stay in your path. We thank you for Jesus and this opportunity that we have to talk about him and his great sacrifice that he gave for us. We pray all of this in his name. Amen. All right, so last time we left off at verse 4 of chapter 1 of Hebrews, and I wanted to just kind of make a couple points on that particular verse before we get started. As we look at that last verse, the verse says, as we've been talking about Christ in these last days, God has spoken through his Son. In verse 4 it says, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. Okay, and then in verse 3, he said, he is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of majesty on high. And so you've got those verses in there that talk about that. And I guess what I want to talk about is the purification for sins. What does that represent? So he says he made the purification for sins. Yes, Bobby? Okay, so purification means to get rid of. In the term of purification, like you would do, like at home, what would you do in order to? What's purification mean? What does that mean?
Cleansing.
A cleansing, yeah. A removal of impurities, right? So like distilled water, something like that. You've distilled it, now you've taken out all of the minerals.
Under the old priest, the priest had to get rid of those things once a year.
Right. So referring to the priesthood, they would have to go through various cleansings and then offer sacrifices not only for themselves, but then also for the people. So yeah, all of that is encased in this one verse. So that's a good point. Thank you for that. So you've got that. And so one of the things I wanted to bring up, which would be Colossians chapter 1, and in verse 13 through 20. Colossians chapter 1, verses 13 through 20. Speaking of God and Jesus, he says, verse 13, for he rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. And he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things are created, both in the heavens and on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself would come to have first place in everything. For it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him, and through him reconcile all things to himself, having made peace through the blood of his cross, through him, whether things on the earth or in heaven, or whether things on earth or in heaven, which would be in contrast to what Bobby was saying, which would be Leviticus 4, was on this day that atonement shall be made for you, to cleanse you, and you will be clean from your sins before the Lord, which is the duty of the priesthood in the prior priesthood. So, and I love that verse because it really talks about, because we talked about the son and the title of son, and how important is that title of son?
The other part.
Very important, yeah.
The only one it's ever been given to.
Only one that's been given to. So good. And so all of that talks about, you've got a little bit of that in there. It says, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. And so in Colossians, that chapter there talks about how things were created through him, for him, and he holds it together. And I like that. So there's a good parallel to that.
Another verse in Hebrews 9,
Hebrews 9.
where it says that he cleanses our conscience also.
Oh, cleanses our conscience. Okay, Hebrews 9.
9 verse 14. How much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God?
Yeah, that's a great verse. Hebrews 9:14. So how much greater is that going to be than the whole old sacrifices? So good. Thank you for that. Any last comments on verse 3? And then verse 4, right? Verse 4. Having become as much superior to the angels as the name he inherited is more excellent than theirs. Okay, so again, the name of the Son being much more excellent than any name that the angels might have. Okay, so you've got, due to his name and the inheritance of his name and the position and the status, Christ is greater than the angels. In Philippians 2:9, it says, "For this reason also God highly exalted him and bestowed upon him the name which is above every name." So, calling Jesus God's Son is affirming his deity. You're affirming Jesus' deity by calling him God's Son. And you're not going to call any angels that, right? And I think that's what the writer's going to be talking about here coming up. So he's obtained an excellent and exalted status, and no angel has this name. And then in 1 Peter 3, verse 22, it says, "Who is at the right hand of God, having gone into heaven after angels and authorities and powers had been subjected to him." So he has an exalted status, and the angels are subject to him. So, the Son, and then angels. Yeah.
You know, you got his audience, they consider angels a superior being, right?
Yes.
So this is his way of putting even Christ ahead of what they consider already superior. And he's about to make the point how he's more superior than them.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's perfect because we did talk about that as far as there was quite a set of beliefs that talked about, the word of God was delivered through angels to the prophets. And so they had a high status of angels. And so one of the things we want to talk about as we go forward is, hold on, slideshow. So as we get into verses 5 through 14, we're going to talk about angels. And there'll be more to talk about next week as well. But angels are messengers. And sometimes that's hard to comprehend. Sometimes they're just messengers. However, they're heavenly beings. They're spiritual beings. And they have names. So we're going to go into a little bit about angels tonight, just a little bit, spend a little time in that, and then I'll bring it back to the verses because that's kind of what the writer wants to do too. So we want to understand what angels are. All right. So verse 14 in chapter 1, they says, "Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to render service for the sake of those who inherit salvation?" What does that tell you about angels just in that verse?
And messengers for God.
Messengers for God.
And they're important.
They're important. They're ministering spirits, right? And they're sent out to render God service. Okay? Sent out to render God service. So I wanted to go over, so let's go over to Psalms 104. Can someone grab that for me? Psalms 104 and read it for me before I get there.
Verse 1 through 4.
Yes.
Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty. Cover yourself with light as with a cloak, stretching out the heavens like a tent curtain. He lays the beams of his upper chambers in the waters and makes the clouds his chariot. He walks on the wings of the wind. He makes the winds his messengers, flaming fires his ministers.
Right? I like that. He makes his messengers winds and his ministers a flaming fire. So they are ministering spirits, and God has control over them and sends them out on various activities. They also have great power, right? So great power. Karsten, would you mind reading 2 Peter 2:11?
Whereas angels which are greater in power and might bring not railing accusations against him before the Lord.
Yeah, so they have great power. And should we accuse of the angels of anything? That's a grave concern, right? Would that be something that we would do? Bring an accusation up against an angel? Okay. So they got great power. Carson, would you read Revelations 18:1?
After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory.
So he's got great authority. So much so that the earth was illumined by it. So that gives you kind of an idea of a spiritual being, an angel with great power and great authority. That's someone to not contend with, right? And we have to think of them as spiritual beings. So let me ask you this, and this is a tough question. What's the origin of angels?
Put here by God.
Put here by God,
His messenger.
his messengers. Tougher question. Created or not?
God created.
Created. God created them for his service, right? Okay, good. All right, so we're there. I want to make sure. Try not to be not too controversial tonight. All right, so great power. I'd like to look at a few descriptions of them. A few descriptions I think that are good. And so bringing those to your attention, let's head over to Daniel. I like Daniel's description. Somebody beats me, feel free to read.
Four through 6.
4 through 6. Yes, sir?
On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen with a fine belt, gold from Topaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of light, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude.
When you listen to that description of an angel that Daniel saw, what are your thoughts? It's Carson's favorite question. What are your thoughts? Number one, I like the descriptions that are being used. I like the descriptions being used that help us understand what we're looking at. And so it might be a scenario where you might say, oh, you know what? That picture doesn't even do it justice. You had to be there live. Because a lot of times you see a picture and you're like, wow, that's a really good picture. But the human eyes are so amazing. You can see things with a lot more detail. Revelations chapter 10, verses 1 through 3, it says, "Then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven, wrapped in a cloud, with a rainbow over his head, and his face was like the sun, and his legs like pillars of fire. And he had a little scroll open in his hand, and he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. And he called out with a loud voice, like a lion roaring. And when he called out, the seven thunders sounded." So you've got a vision and you've got a sound. And then I think that these are described in ways that we can understand. All right, so I guess what I want to do is, can you name some appearing of angels? Can you name some off the top of your head? Michael? Gabriel? Can you name the events? Can you name the events of where the angels were around?
Yes, in Jude, verse 9, it shows that their power is limited by what God tells them or they can do. But when the archangel Michael contended with the devil, disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, "The Lord rebuke you."
Excellent. Okay, so that's Michael. And he's talking to who? He's
The devil.
he's contending with the devil, right? Excellent. You said another one? Gabriel? You think you said Michael? Okay, so Gabriel. What about an event where an angel appeared? Okay, you got the tomb. I like that one.
When one wrestled with the
Jacob.
Old Testament, the one that touched his hip,
Yes. Touched his hip and
Jacob.
All right, so you got an angel wrestling with Jacob. I have another thought about that one. Anybody else?
Numbers 22,
Numbers 22. Which one's that?
Balaam and the donkey.
Yes, thank you.
Also, when Daniel and them were in the fiery furnace.
Daniel, okay, at the fiery furnace. I like that one. Where's the first angel being described?
Garden.
At the garden, yeah. At the garden, after they got kicked out. Okay, so those are all good. We also have appearances of angels. We mentioned the tomb. We hadn't mentioned that they appeared to Mary and Elizabeth. All right. And anywhere else? That's Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, another good one. Another example. Okay, so that's good. All right, so let's think about that. There's several different types of angels. There's a seraphim. And so when you look at the seraphim, what's the description of the seraphim? Somebody have Isaiah chapter 6, verse 22. Did I write it down wrong?
Trick question.
Trick question. Oh!
It's verse 2.
Verse 2, thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Seraphim were standing above him, each having 6 wings, with 2 each covered his face, and with 2 each covered his feet, and with 2 each flew.
Okay, so you've got a description of an angelic being that has how many wings? 6 wings. All right, so you've got an interesting conversation here. How many times are seraphims mentioned? I think that's the only one. But interesting, right? Then you've got the cherubim. Cherubim, a lot more mentions of the cherubim. So, cherubim. Genesis 3:24. There's an excellent example. So what's happening in Genesis 3:24?
Yeah, but they're guarding the garden.
Yeah, it is a very descriptive term too.
He drove out the man at the east of the Garden of Eden. He
So that vision to me, when you see the sword turning every way, it reminds me of like those 3D photos. And when you move, it moves too. Right? That's kind of an interesting visual for me. So you've got the mention of the cherubim. You've got Ezekiel. Ezekiel had several different visions, and we studied Ezekiel last summer. But in there, you've had various descriptions of the cherubim. They have wings as well. And they also were on wheels that turned every which way. They had different forms, different faces.
They also have the ability to not do what God tells them to do, because he kicked some of them out of heaven for that.
Les,
Darkness.
Les, you're getting ahead of me, but I like it. I like it because we'll get into that discussion because there's other angels as well, right? We would classify these as the good angels, right? All right, so I wanted to talk about the angel of the Lord. So there's descriptions of the angel of the Lord in several different places. For me, this is my personal opinion. Those are possible manifestations of God himself. Possible. And the reason I say that is because in these particular situations, God is taking care of business. And in Genesis, I think that's the one that you were talking about earlier, Genesis 22. Right? So in 22:11, it says, get my page turned. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. Angel of the Lord called to Abraham. Okay, so that's when Abraham was trying to sacrifice his son, right? Verse 15. Verse 15. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you. You've got a conversation happening there that I think is important, and that's why I'm saying, angel of the Lord. There's a couple different other manifestations of the angel of the Lord. In Numbers 22, somebody have that? Numbers 22, verse 31. That's the one that we were talking about earlier, so that's Balaam. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand. And he bowed down and fell on his face. And so, interesting conversation there. I've talked about that before. Number one, you've got an animal speaking. And number two, you've got an angel standing there. So if I were Balaam, I would be shocked to my core.
Get their attention for sure.
Get your attention for sure, right? All right, in Judges 6, 21 through 20 is the event of, I can't remember his name right now, just escaped me. Gideon, thank you. Gideon. So we got the angel standing at the threshing floor. In Chronicles 21. Chronicles 21 is a very interesting chapter, and it's really the whole chapter. I don't want to read the whole chapter right now, but I think it gives a good view of what's being done there, because you got a couple scenarios there. In chapter 21 of 1 Chronicles, you've got verse 1, then Satan stood against Israel and incited David to number Israel. How did that go? It didn't go very well, right? So he sent Joab out, and Joab went against really his own will, and he went out and numbered them. Verse 7, but God was displeased with this thing, and he struck Israel. And David said to God, I have sinned greatly. that I have done this thing. But now please take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have acted very foolishly. And the Lord spoke to Gad, here's a prophet, David's seer, saying, Go say to David, Thus says the Lord, 3 things I will offer you. Choose one of them. So he went there, and he puts a pestilence on him. And so in verse 14, so the Lord sent a pestilence on Israel, and 70,000 men of Israel fell. What was the number before he? 70,000. Verse 5, 1.1 million. 1.1 million. And that didn't count the Levites or people out of Bethlehem. So Joab didn't want to count those guys. 1.1 million, 70,000 gone in one day. Is that a lot of people? Carson, how much does the Mercedes-Benz hold? 70,000. Put a visual to that. It's a lot of people, right? Okay, so you've got that going on. Now, and he said, okay, so I want to talk about that. But as he was about to destroy, the Lord saw, and he relented from the calamity, and he said to the angel who was working destruction, It is enough. Now stay your hand. And the angel of the Lord was standing by the threshing floor of Ornan, the Jebusite. And David lifted his eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing between earth and heaven, and in his hand a drawn sword stretched out over Jerusalem. So you've got this vision of the angel doing God's will, which in this case was a pestilence against Israel and destroying 70,000 people pretty quickly. Was there any other incidences where that occurred? Did the angel of the Lord come to destroy in other events? There's a couple of Philistines. There's one in there. There's another battle where, the Gideon, right? Gideon was another battle where they destroyed themselves, but God confused them, right? One of them that I was thinking of was angel of the Lord coming out to destroy. It was the last plague. The last plague. That angel came out to destroy everyone who didn't what?
Blood on their door.
Have blood on their doorposts. Right? So good. So you've got this angel of the Lord who is destroying. And the other thing is that the reason why I say it's a possible manifestation, because those angels have conversations with like Abraham, Sarah. We talked about Sodom and Gomorrah, and they're walking and they're talking, and when they're recognized by Lot, they're like, he recognizes them right away. These are people that need to take care of them. So you've got those types of scenarios happening. So I think that's interesting. Does anybody have any comments on that? I think the one that I'm talking about would be like when he did wrestle Jacob. Possible manifestation of God, because all he had to do was like touch his thigh, right? Came out of the socket. But what does the name mean? Because he gave him a name after that, right? He named him Israel, right? Named him Israel, and what does Israel mean? I believe, what is it? I think it's a wrestled God, yeah. Someone who's wrestled God. Strives with God. So, all right, good. Comments, questions? Yes?
Just as like a general comment, it's hard for me to even wrap my mind around angels, because it's something, at least kind of what I read, it's incomprehensible, because it's like nothing I've ever seen before. And they're just the complexity of the different angels and stuff like that. I guess kind of one of the cooler things is like, I don't know if you ever come across like one of the AI renditions of like what we expect versus what the Bible describes angel to be like. And I mean, take that for what it's worth, but when you see one, to recognize not only these different figures, but just, I guess the magnitude of it, the power of seeing an angel, seeing our God
Mm-hmm.
in heaven.
Seeing a spiritual being.
Because when
Right.
they see him, when people are encountering angels, their immediate reaction is fear.
Yes.
I don't think that that's just something that they put in there for no reason. I think that that's actually what struck these people, and I think that's what would strike us now. It's just hard, I guess I just said, it's hard to even wrap my mind around angels because I have no sense of what, I don't know if we will have a sense of what that looks like until we interact. But the Bible gives us a description of it, and it's
Yeah.
powerful.
It's very powerful. So I appreciate that. Yes. If you ever see an angel, it's going to be a big event in your life. A big event. So good. One of the things that in Ezekiel, as I go back there real quick, in Ezekiel, there's more descriptions of them. Talks about them being on the right side of the temple. And when they entered, the cloud filled the inner court. Moreover, the sound of the wings of the cherubim was heard as far as the outer court. And so their wings made a lot of noise. And I think that's a good description as well. All right, angels are spiritual beings. We talked about Gabriel in Daniel, and he's mentioned in Daniel because he's talking to Daniel. And then in Luke, same angel. How many years between Daniel and Luke?
How many years between the gardens?
You're right. There's a lot of years. So again, giving you kind of a perspective of angels, right? There's Michael. We talked about Michael. So in Jude 9 and then in Revelations 12, we see Michael. Michael is described as a what? An archangel, right? So he's got a status as an archangel. Okay? So we got Michael. Here's where we get controversial. What about Satan? What about the devil? In John 8:44, and then Revelations and Corinthians, you've got all these mentions of Satan and the devil. You've also got first couple chapters of Job, right? Job's having a conversation with God. Does Satan have helpers? Yeah, I think we're aware of that, right? So you've got good angels, and you've got angels that serve the devil. And I guess, Les, you said something very interesting earlier. How did they become angels that are not serving God?
They have an ability to fall. God isn't making them just like He doesn't make us do. We have a choice to follow Him or not. So apparently they were given that same choice.
I think that's a very excellent point because that is the free will. Angels have free will as well. However, and we'll get into Hebrews further, what do we have that angels don't? Oh, it's a big one. We have the opportunity of salvation. Angels don't have that. They're already in the spiritual realm. They've already made a choice. Which I also think is interesting. Hard to wrap my brain around that one as well. Because how can you be in the presence of God and decide, I've got a better idea? That was tough. Okay, so those are all good. The destroyer. We talked a little bit about that one. The destroyer, Revelations 9:11. And I love the one in 1 Corinthians. I don't want to say I love it, but it's a great description of what would you look forward to if you met the destroyer, God's destroyer. 1 Corinthians 10:10. 1 Corinthians 10:10. Let's go to 9. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did and were destroyed by the serpents. nor grumble as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Destroyed by the destroyer. And then I've got Exodus 12 in there because that's the last plague. And then Revelations 9:11. Revelations 9:11. Which says, they have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name is Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek he's called Apollyon. So this angel has a name. This angel has a name. All right. The last one I have is, how many angels are there?
Revelation talks about on the throne seeing myriads of angels worshiping.
Yes.
And worshiping God, so we have no idea really.
Exactly. So that's a good point. So in Psalms 68, it says, the chariots of God are myriads, thousands upon thousands. Matthew 26, verse 53, Christ says, or do you not think I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? Right? And then Revelations, as you mentioned. Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels around the throne, and the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them were myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands. There's a lot of them. So good. The other thing I want to mention up there is that all of those spiritual beings are real, which includes Satan. And we need to remember that. And Satan is described as what in Peter? In Peter, he's described as prowling around like a roaring lion. 1 Peter 5:8, prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. That's not seeking someone to play with. No, seeking someone to devour. Keep that in mind. Swallow up, yes. Yeah, swallow up. Thanks, Bobby. And then 2 Corinthians 11:14, it says, no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Satan is real, and we need to remind people of that too. A lot of times people like to think of all the good things. They got to remember what's in it for Satan. And I think I've said it before. People talk about hell as just as like Satan's HQ. It's not. It's built for him to be destroyed in. Right? It's not his HQ. So good. All right. So I got that. So as we go through the chapter, 5 minutes. Thank you, Les. Things not said to angels, right? Things not said to angels. Verse 5 in Psalms 2:7 and in Acts 13:33. Things not said to angels.
You're my son.
You are my son. Yes. You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Not said to angels. And verse 5b. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. Not said to angels. Okay, so you've got 2 Samuel there as a verse. It says, when your days are complete and you lie down and with your fathers, I will raise up your descendant after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. And he shall build a house for my name, and I will establish a throne of his kingdom forever. And I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. Not said to angels. Verse 6. And let all of the angels of God worship him. Not said to angels. Because who is subservient to Christ? Right? Angels. Right? So angels. So in Psalm 96, it says, the heavens declare his righteousness, all the people see his glory. Let all be put to shame and served who serve carved images who boast of idols. Worship him, all you gods, talking about idols. You who love the Lord and hate evil. He preserves the souls of his saints, and he delivers them out of the hand of the wicked. Verse 7. What's not said to angels? Who makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. And we covered that verse earlier in Psalms 104. Ministering spirits. Verse 8. Verse 8. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever, and the righteous scepter is the scepter of his kingdom. So in Psalms 45, verse 6, it says, Your throne, O God, forever and ever, a scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. Things not said to angels. Right? So we've established Christ as being the Son, inheriting that name. Verses 9 through 12, which is Psalms 102. It's talked about, O you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the works of your hands, and they will perish, but you will remain, and they will all become old like a garment, and like a mantle you will roll them up like a garment, and they will also be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not come to an end. That's Psalms. It's coming right out of Psalms in verses 9 through 12. Verse 13. What's not said to angels? Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool of your feet. And then as we look at the rest of it, that's kind of the end of that. But the idea of the end of the chapter 1 is that the main point is that those words were never said to angels, but to who?
Christ.
Exactly. Pointing back to verse 1, where he's spoken through his Son, Christ. And he has been given a name that is higher than angels, more excellent than angels, exalted over angels. And we talked about angels. They're pretty amazing beings, right? But Christ is better than that. And these words were never said to any angels. As amazing as they are, Christ is superior. So he's setting the groundwork for the rest of his argument.
I just happen to think of one more,
Mm-hmm.
where it says, all authority on heaven and earth is given to me. That was never said to angels.
Exactly. Yeah, never said to angels. Said to Christ. Christ said it. Yep. So good. Thank you for that. Treg is going to open for me next week. I'm going to be traveling, unfortunately, but he'll start off in chapter 2, so be prepared for that. I want to thank you so much for your kind attention and listening, so I appreciate that. Thank you.